All right, folks. Well, it's Tuesday, and we're finishing up the third unit on the French Revolution. So let's get started so I can give you some time to get your rest of your work done today. I'm going to be posting some review quizzes that you'll do for today's homework, and have those done by Thursday morning. And the quizzes will just be review so that you're prepared to take the test on the French Revolution. And we finished up last time leaving off on Napoleon's downfall, or at least his first downfall, where he gets defeated and exiled to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy in the Mediterranean Sea. While Napoleon is away, France is essentially forced to put Louis XVI's younger brother, who incidentally also happened to be named Louis, on the throne. And the reason they didn't put his son on the throne, Louis XVI's son would have been Louis XVII technically for a short time, but Louis XVII, the son of Louis XVI, died in prison from malnourishment and illness. And so they go to then Louis XVIII, who is the younger brother of Louis XVI. But Louis XVIII is every bit as unpopular as Louis XVI was, and people didn't care much for him. They also didn't like the fact that the king was put back on the throne after all of these trials and tribulations of the French Revolution. Shortly after, a little less than a year later, Napoleon escapes from Elba and comes back to Paris. And he is warmly welcomed by French citizens, and he becomes emperor again. So he escapes from exile and comes back to Paris and reclaims his seat as the emperor of France. This period of time after Napoleon's return from Elba is sometimes called the 100 Days, because that's about how long it lasts. His return to the throne as Emperor of France would be short-lived. And so European allies quickly gather armies to come together to fight Napoleon and put an end to him once and for all. So they start preparing for a battle at a city called Waterloo. Waterloo's in the Netherlands. Maybe it's Belgium. I better double check that. It's near France. And the Battle of Waterloo ends up being Napoleon's last defeat. Okay, why does Napoleon get defeated at Waterloo after just returning to France? Well, they fought for 2 hard days. And there's a couple of different reasons that this battle doesn't go well for Napoleon. Number one, the night before the battle began, there was a torrential thunderstorm. And these guys were sleeping in the field. They wake up, the field is like flooded. They're all wet. They didn't sleep well because it was lightning and thundering all night, and they're basically sleeping outdoors. So it was truly miserable the night before. So they woke up, they were already exhausted. Also, Napoleon, and this is an unusual story in history, but it seemingly is true. Napoleon didn't have like most people who lived during the 1800s, didn't have a particularly great diet. And as a byproduct of not having a very good diet, he was prone to getting these things, a medical condition called hemorrhoids, which is a thrombosed blood vessel in the anus. And they're painful, and Napoleon required a horse to be able to command his troops effectively, and he couldn't get on his horse and ride for very long because he was in excruciating pain. Quite literally a pain in the butt. And so he was not able to command his troops very effectively. And this is another thing that probably contributes to their loss, the French loss in the Battle of Waterloo. Another thing is that, they had to, in order to let the battlefield drain out, Napoleon was used to getting a start in his battles early, but they had to let the water drain out from the field in Waterloo from the battlefield so that the horses would have a chance, the cavalry. And so this delays the start of the battle to the advantage of the British, who were waiting for Prussians, Germans, reinforcements to arrive. And they battled for 2 days straight, and the French finally gave way, and the Battle of Waterloo ends up in an utter French defeat at the hands of a British general by the name of Wellington, the Duke of Wellington. And here you can see an artistic rendition. This was a painting done years later of the Battle of Waterloo. You could imagine it was quite chaotic. There was a lot of death. The entire battlefield was just littered with dead or dying soldiers who likely perished sometime in the following days as they laid on the battlefield after this battle ended. And this final defeat ended Napoleon's bid for power. After this, Napoleon is exiled once again. And this is, like I said, it's called the 100 Days because his attempt to return back to power lasted for about this long after his escape from Elba. He's exiled a second time, this time much, much farther away, and it's going to be very difficult now for him to escape. He's exiled to a tiny little island off the coast of Africa called St. Helena in the South Atlantic. And 6 years later, he dies of stomach illness, most likely stomach cancer. And so anyhow, it's kind of a ignominious end for poor Napoleon, who, rose to power, was a military genius, conquered much of Europe, but overall ends up getting defeated by a number of European allies against him. The British, the Prussians, the Austrians, and so on, all gather together and manage to defeat Napoleon once and for all. After this, though, the last little part of this unit is talking about what happens after Napoleon's defeat. And basically, they're trying to, at this point, after Napoleon, after 20 years of the French Revolution or more, it's been about 25 years since the start of the French Revolution. It has been pure political chaos in France, and these have had a ripple effect, just like when you throw a stone into a pond and it ripples off where the stone enters the water. It has a ripple effect on the rest of Europe. And the rest of Europe, of course, was doing all they could to stop or prevent the spread of this revolution into their own countries. And so after Napoleon's defeat, European nations are looking to establish peace, and really they're looking to hit the reset button. They want to bring Europe back to a time where, things were predictable, where kings were in power, absolutism was the order of the day. And so a series of meetings take place in one of the most conservative monarchies in all of Europe, which is the Austrian monarchy. The Habsburg dynasty is what it's called. And a series of meetings take place at the capital of Austria in Vienna. And they set up policies to essentially try to establish peace, return to normalcy. And the original Congress of Vienna meeting was only supposed to last for 4 weeks. It instead lasts for 8 months in order for them to negotiate the terms of what Europe is going to look like now after the after the French Empire and the Napoleonic era has come to a close. So the leader of this meeting is a guy by the name of Klemens von Metternich. Okay, and he was basically an Austrian foreign minister. Okay, he's not the king of Austria. He's a politician in Austria, but nonetheless holds a rank foreign minister within the government. And most of the decisions of the Congress of Vienna are going to be made by the great powers of the time, which was Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain, and France. And the idea with the Congress of Vienna, they have a few different goals. Number one, put legitimate monarchs back on the throne. So put a king back on the throne in France who is a legitimate monarch. That's number one. Number two, establishing peace, a long-lasting peace in Europe that would prevent wars from breaking out again. Number three, stop all revolutionary dissent. They want to get rid of all the memory of the last 25 years of all of this revolutionary chaos of France and agree to help one another put down any attempts at revolt. Okay, so this is another goal of the Congress of Vienna. And at this meeting, Klemens von Metternich, who's leading it, has the most influence on everything. And he strongly distrusts the democratic ideals that had been inspiring the French Revolution. The last thing he wants to see happen are these democratic, liberal Enlightenment ideas challenging the conservative order of Europe. Okay, they don't want to see more revolutions. They're trying to establish a situation in Europe that will bring Europe back. They want to, if you will, make Europe great again by bringing it back to a time before the French Revolution where everything was nice and predictable and monarchical and so on, okay? So here's an image of Klemens von Metternich. And so this is Metternich's plan for Europe. He wants laws to remain stable. He wants to maintain the status quo. He does not want to see any more change. This is a very, very, what we would call conservative, meaning against change, retaining tradition, holding on to tradition, all right, political movement. And they want to prevent further or future French aggression, meaning that they want to limit the threat of France. They don't want France becoming another European threat again. They want to restore what was called a balance of power so that no country would be a threat. Okay, in fact, they ultimately end up, basically creating a situation where every nation in all of the great powers in Europe, not every nation, but all the great powers in Europe would more or less share equally in their power, and that there was no single big threat to the rest of Europe. They want to restore Europe's royal families to the throne, like I said, particularly in France. All right? And so the Congress takes steps to make countries like France, they take steps to make France weaker by making the countries around France stronger. And this is going to create that balance of power I was just talking about. The Austrian Netherlands, which is today Belgium, and the Dutch Republic form what became known as the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The borders of the Holy Roman Empire, which was the territories that now comprise Germany, they consolidate a number of these. There used to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these tiny little states in Central Europe that formed what was known as the Holy Roman Empire. Prussia is the largest of them, and what they did after the Congress of Vienna is they reduce the number of states by conglomerating states together and making what became known as the German Confederation, which was a group of 39 small German states, but they're a lot larger than the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tiny, tiny, tiny little principalities that used to make up that region. So they consolidate a bunch of that, they bundle them all together, and they create 39 small German states which would be controlled by Austria. Switzerland at this time becomes independent. Previously, they had been made a puppet by France. Also, another thing that they're advocating for in the Congress of Vienna is something called legitimacy. Legitimacy is the principle that as many rulers as possible should be restored as European monarchs, kings. And they believed that this would bring stability to Europe by having absolute monarchs put back on the throne where they had been taken off the throne. The Congress of Vienna in general is a political triumph. It is very successful for a long time, creating a lasting peace for about 40 years. It was the first time in Europe that so many nations came together to cooperate and agreed to come to each other's aid for the purposes of creating a long-lasting peace. So we have to say that although the Congress of Vienna is really trying to take this revolutionary spirit that had, promoted the French Revolution, and they're trying to subdue that. They're trying to get rid of these revolutionary ideals and establish a long-lasting conservative order that restores monarchs, brings Europe back to how it used to be before the French Revolution started, put kings back on the throne, contain France, stop them from being a threat anymore, strengthen the nations that surround France so that France would have more difficulty invading other places again. And it's pretty successful. It's pretty successful in doing this. But, by this point, we're not in the mid-1700s anymore. They're trying to hit the reset button on Europe and turn it back to how it used to be back before the French Revolution in the 1750s, 60s, 70s, okay? But it's not the 1760s or 1770s anymore. It's the early 1800s. And these ideals that inspired the French Revolution, Europeans have already gotten a sweet taste of liberty. They've gotten a sweet taste of republican government. And so, as successful as the Congress of Vienna was in creating peace for about 40 years, the fact of the matter is that as time moves on, more and more people in Europe are going to start experimenting with these revolutionary ideals that inspired France. And we will see Europe transition over the course of the 1800s into a far more democratic type system as it is today. But remember that all of this, the United States by this point has already been democratic since our revolution, or at least somewhat democratic. Not everybody had rights or freedom in America, but more freedom in America than in a lot of places in Europe. And Europe did not have a history of democracy for the last 2,000 years, going back to the Roman Empire, or the Roman Republic. Europe did not have a lot of experience with that. And so the transition of Europe becoming more democratic is going to be a slow one. And after the Congress, Britain and France turn into what are known as constitutional monarchies. Britain was already one, but France gets turned into a constitutional monarchy. What that means is that the king's power is limited by a document that grants certain rights and freedoms to other people, basically. All right. On the other hand, Prussia, which is basically Germany, Austria, and Russia, they are still absolute monarchies, which are more conservative. They're more old school, all right? And so they're going to retain, the kings are going to retain absolute power there. Their power will not be limited by a constitution as it was in Britain and now in France. And these three absolute monarchs of Prussia, Austria, and Russia sign an agreement known as the Holy Alliance, where they basically argued that Christian principles, and that's another feature of conservatism, is that it tends to be very religiously oriented. So they're using the Roman Catholic Church and just in general Christianity as a way of legitimizing absolutism and as a fundamental basis for conservative political thought. Status quo and absolutism and all of that are supported by the church, by Christianity. All right. After the Congress, eventually Metternich creates something known as one of the outcomes of the Congress of Vienna is the Concert of Europe. And I want you to think of that almost just like an orchestra concert, okay, where every nation, if any of you kids are band kids, for example, when you go to band, right, you've got all sorts of different instruments. You've got the trumpets, you've got the flutes, you've got the clarinets, you've got the oboes, bassoons, tubas, trombones, percussion, etc., saxophones, and you name it, okay? Each of those instruments plays a part, literally, in the band, in the orchestra. This Concert of Europe was basically trying to make it, there's always, if you are in band or if you've ever, been in band, you know this. What's the instrument that always plays over everybody else and is way too loud for their own good? Of course, it's the trumpets, okay? And France was kind of the trumpets of Europe. They had been really loud, they'd been really boisterous, they'd been subduing the rest of the European nations, and they're trying to create a nice balanced concert where every European nation plays a nice balanced role in the political landscape of Europe, all right? Basically saying if any nation starts, getting too feisty, all right, if any nation starts getting too loud, starts getting too revolutionary, that the other nations would step in and help each other out to put down that revolution wherever they took place. But in a lot of ways, it was a little too late for this because a new era had already begun with the French Revolution. They had already been experimenting, particularly in France, but in other places, with these revolutionary ideals, democracy. And eventually, this is going to cause a lot of major political upheavals in the mid-1800s. 1848, in particular, is a year in Europe where a bunch of revolutions break out all across Europe. Now, many of them fail, all right? A lot of these revolutionary movements fail, not because the European nations come in to help each other out, but more just because the ideals that were inspiring these revolutions were not very realistic in how they went about, they were not very realistic in how they went about securing their goals, all right? They were built on kind of these, lofty ideas that were not very practical. And so a lot of these revolutions fail. Not all of them, but a good number of them fail. But after these revolutions happen in 1848, there's going to be more pressure in Europe to start making reforms, making changes to how governments work in Europe, and we are going to see them slowly transition over the course of the late 1800s into being more democratic type situations in Europe. And that all culminates in World War I, which ultimately brings about the end of a number of these European monarchies that had been in power for many of them hundreds and hundreds of years by that point. And so, it really has only been a little bit more than a century since we saw the decline of these major European powers in across Europe. Basically in Austria, Russia, Germany, etc. All of them had monarchs in power all the way up until the end of World War I. But by the time that World War I ends, there's already been a lot of changes in Europe that have brought about more democracy, more Republican-style ideas, okay? And then finally, after the Congress, nationalism as an idea starts to spread. Previously, people had identified themselves as being loyal to a monarch, loyal to a king. Increasingly, after the Congress of Vienna, people start seeing their loyalties as resting with the state. Excuse me. And so they start to identify under a national identity, that they no longer are loyal to, say, the King of France, but they are loyal to the nation of France rather than a king. Britain and Prussia, after the Congress, Prussia, remember, becomes Germany. All right, Prussia becomes Germany. It's not Germany yet, but it will be by the late 1800s. Britain and Prussia become much stronger during this time. France becomes weaker after the Congress of Vienna, and that was by design because they were trying to isolate and weaken France. And more people see democracy as the way of the future eventually. It's not total democracy yet, but eventually democracy will prevail in Europe. So, that brings us to the end of the PowerPoint. And at this time, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting up 2 online quizzes. Or is it, I think it's 2. It might be 3 actually. They're just, each of them has, I don't know, maybe about 20 or so questions. And I'm going to be putting those up onto Canvas, and you guys are going to be doing those review quizzes. You'll have 3 attempts on each of them. Your best score will be saved, and these quizzes are meant to help you review the content. I do encourage you to go back if you don't understand anything, to go back. All of the lectures that we've been doing are still saved on Canvas. All you got to do is go to the announcements and click on the lecture that you want to watch. Review things. You can speed it up, you can pause it, you can skip through it, do whatever you like to help start reviewing for the test. Practice these online quizzes. Be looking through the PowerPoint that's on Canvas. These kinds of things, and this will help you to prepare for the test. Okay, and the test will be on Thursday morning. It will open up, and it is a timed test, so you have to do it in the amount of time that you have. So make sure that if you start it, that you're giving yourself enough time to complete it in one sitting. Okay, let me quickly go over and see if I have any comments here. Can you extend the vocab? I already did extend it to today, to this morning. Mr. Knight, I turned my vocab in at exactly 8 a.m. and it cut me off. Then it said failed to submit. All right, I'll reopen it until 9. How about that? And then you guys can hand that in so that I don't have to deal with late work. Course, let me see. I'll do this right now. Assignments. Edit, and I will make this due now at 9, so hand that in right now. Go back to, I just updated it, so go back and submit that immediately. Okay, let's see here. Arnav, don't tell people to shut up, that's rude. When is the test? It's on Thursday. Is it on quizzes? Yes, the online quizzes will be quizzes. How many questions are on the test? I don't know. A pretty good number. It's a big unit. There was a lot of stuff that we covered here. Is the practice going to be due on Thursday at 8? Yes, the practice quizzes will be due at 8 a.m. on Thursday, so make sure that you get them done. I'm giving you guys plenty of time today to at least do a couple of them. You might even be able to get them all done by the end of class today. Maybe not, but maybe so. If you don't get a score that you like, remember you have 3 chances to do it. So, you know, and even if you do get a good score, do it again, just for extra practice. It doesn't hurt to do it more. Use it as a study tool, okay? A lot of you guys are going to need to come in on Thursday and have yourself a big day, all right? And get your work, you know, get a good score on the test so your grades go up, all right? And so that will be the plan. There will not be a lecture on Thursday. The test will open on Thursday, and you are to use your class time on Thursday to complete that test. If you do not complete the test, don't be sending me messages, you know, hey, I forgot to do it, da-da-da-da-da-da. You need to get it done, all right? That's what Thursday's class is for. Just like if we showed up in the classroom, you got to do your test on Thursday, get that taken care of so that you're staying on top of what you need to do. All right. Any other last questions before I sign off here and put these quizzes up so that you can start studying? Last call for questions. Is attendance to go on to Canvas? Yes, so your attendance is log on to Canvas, hand in your vocab assignment, and that will be, I'll check to make sure that you did those 2 things, and if you did, you'll get your attendance for the day. Yeah, Jason, I've been checking my emails. Did you send me a second thing? I think I added the 2 things that you sent me last week. If you have other things to send to me, please send them to Canvas, because I get 6 million emails a day, and it's very easy to lose track of emails because I lose so many of them. But Jason, I do believe I already submitted the 2 things that you sent me last week. Pretty sure I added them. Unless you handed in more, but if you did hand in more, then just send it to the Canvas and I'll take it. What's my thoughts on animal cruelty? Well, of course it's terrible. No one should be cruel to animals or to other people. There's no need for that. Any other questions pertaining to things? I sent in the scientific revolutions. All right, I'll have to deal with that. I'll have to go back and look and add it. Happy birthday, Neil. Can we take the test on Friday? I'd rather you took it on Thursday when I'm giving you time in class to take it. Hey, thanks a lot, Gareth. I appreciate that. Neil, happy 15th birthday. That's really cool. Have fun with that, you know. I remember being 15, kind of. That was a million years ago, but... All right, very good. Well, folks, I'm going to post these assignments now. Be looking out for them on Canvas. Get started on them. Use your class time today wisely. Study for the test. Come on Thursday morning. Do a good job on the test, and we'll see you then. Have a great rest of the day.